Ethan had lived on the ranch his entire life, and he knew every sound the land made. He knew how the wind moved through the dry grass at night, how the old barn door creaked when the weather changed, and how the distant hills turned dark blue when the moon came up. Even though he loved the ranch, there were nights when the silence felt heavy. After his father passed away 2 years earlier, the ranch became too quiet. He did all the work alone, feeding animals, checking fences, repairing tools, and keeping everything running. It was exhausting, but he never complained. He told himself he could handle it. Yet deep inside, he wished for someone to help. Even just during the late hours, he had put out a simple message in town: a night helper needed at the ranch. The hours were unusual, somewhere between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., because that was when certain chores needed to be done, especially during hot seasons when animals were more active. But no one accepted. People said it was too late, too far, too lonely. Some worried about the remote road. Others simply didn't want night work. Ethan slowly stopped expecting anyone to respond. Then one night, close to midnight, his phone rang. The ranch was dark, except for a small lamp near his chair. Ethan looked at the screen and didn't recognize the number. For a moment he wondered if he should ignore it, but something pushed him to answer. When he picked up, a soft, nervous voice greeted him. She said her name was Maria. She asked quietly if the night job at the ranch was still available. Her tone sounded tired, almost shaky, as if she had gathered all her courage just to make the call. Ethan sat up, feeling alert. He told her the job was still open. Maria asked if she could start right away tonight, if possible. That surprised him. No one had ever shown such urgency. He asked if everything was all right. There was a pause on the phone, and then she answered with a simple yes, though her voice didn't sound confident. Ethan didn't press. He simply gave her the directions and told her to be careful on the road. She thanked him so softly that he barely heard it before she hung up. About 30 minutes later, Ethan stepped outside the house with a flashlight. The night air was cool, and the stars were bright, but the dirt road leading to the ranch was almost invisible. He waited near the gate. Soon, headlights appeared in the distance, weak, flickering lights that belonged to an older car. The vehicle moved slowly, as if the driver was struggling to see. When the car finally reached the gate, Maria stepped out. She was carrying a small bag in one hand and pushing her hair away from her eyes with the other. Her clothes were simple, a little worn, and she looked as if she had come straight from another long shift somewhere else. Her tiredness was clear, but what caught Ethan's attention most was the cautious way she scanned the area. It wasn't fear of the dark. It was the kind of look a person gives when they are not used to safe places. Ethan greeted her warmly and offered to help carry her bag, but she shook her head gently and kept it close to her side. He didn't take it personally. He sensed she didn't trust easily, and that was fine. Trust took time, and he wasn't going to rush it. He led her to the barn, where most of the night tasks were waiting. As they walked, she kept glancing at the ground, at the sky, at the horses watching them from the corral. She didn't talk much, but Ethan noticed that everything she saw, she observed with care, as if memorizing details. He explained the chores slowly, feeding the animals, checking water buckets, making sure the fences were secure, and keeping an eye on the livestock that tended to roam at night. Maria nodded at everything he said, listening quietly. She didn't interrupt, didn't complain, didn't show any hesitation. When Ethan asked if she was comfortable around animals, she simply replied, "Yes, I like them. They don't judge." That sentence stayed with him for the rest of the night, as they worked side by side. Ethan kept noticing small signs that Maria was used to hard labor. She carried feed buckets with steady hands. She moved carefully, but with experience. She brushed the horses the same way someone who had done it many times before would do. But even though she worked well, there was an unreachable distance in her eyes, like she had learned to protect her thoughts from the world. After about an hour, Ethan offered her a cup of warm tea. She hesitated, but accepted it. They sat on 2 old crates outside the barn. The moon was bright that night, lighting the whole ranch in a soft glow. Maria held the cup with both hands, letting the warmth settle into her fingers. Ethan asked politely if she was from the town. She nodded. He asked how long she had lived there. She said not long, Then she fell silent again. Ethan didn't push for more information. He could feel she wasn't ready to talk about her life. Instead, he told her a bit about the ranch, how his father built most of the structures, how the land had changed over the years, how he used to climb the old oak tree as a child. As he spoke, he noticed Maria listening, almost relaxing, as if simple stories gave her comfort. But she didn't know that while Ethan talked. He kept thinking about something else, something she knew nothing about. Behind the barn, past the small fenced field, stood a tiny wooden cabin. Ethan had built it himself almost a year earlier. He built it quietly, without telling anyone. At the time, he didn't fully understand why. Part of him said it was for a future ranch worker. Another part of him felt it was for someone who needed a place to rest, someone who might appear in his life unexpectedly. But he never finished explaining the reason to himself. Nobody had ever used the cabin. It stayed empty, clean, waiting, and every time Ethan glanced in that direction, he wondered if that unfinished feeling inside him was trying to say something. After their short break, they continued working. Maria didn't complain once, even when the tasks became harder. She checked the fences in the dark, trusting her flashlight and sense of direction. She lifted heavy bags without asking for help. She worked with quiet determination that Ethan respected. He couldn't remember the last time he saw someone work with such steady focus during such late hours. When they finished, Maria thanked him for giving her the chance. Her voice sounded sincere, almost relieved. Ethan told her she was welcome to come every night as long as she needed the work. She nodded, and for a moment a faint smile appeared on her face. It was small, but it made her look completely different, softer, younger, and hopeful. Before she left, Ethan noticed her looking around again, but this time with less fear and more curiosity. The ranch seemed to calm her. He wondered what kind of place she had come from, what kind of life made her look over her shoulder so often, why she needed this midnight job so urgently. But he didn't ask. Not yet. When Maria drove away, her taillights faded into the darkness. Ethan stood by the gate long after the car disappeared. The night grew quiet again, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. For the first time in a long while, the ranch didn't feel empty. Someone else had breathed life into it. He looked toward the small cabin behind the barn once more. Its windows reflected the moonlight. He had swept it earlier that week without knowing why. Maybe now he understood. Maybe the cabin wasn't built for just anyone. Maybe it had been waiting for someone who needed it more than he ever expected. Ethan didn't know Maria's full story. He only knew she was carrying a weight she didn't talk about. But something inside him whispered that she wasn't just a night worker passing through. There was something about her that made him slow down and pay attention. Something quiet but strong. As he walked back to his house, the cool night breeze brushed against his face. The ranch felt different, now less lonely, more alive. Maria didn't know it yet, but her arrival had already started changing things. She had come for a job. But Ethan sensed that their paths crossing at midnight was not just coincidence, and she had no idea that a small cabin stood waiting for her, a place built with care. A place she'd never expected, and a place that might become more important to her than she could imagine. The storm hit the ranch earlier than expected. Dark clouds rolled over the hills in the late evening. By the time the clock reached 11 p.m., rain was pouring heavily, hitting the roof like stones. Ethan stood near the window, watching the wind bend the tall grass. He wondered if Maria would still come in such rough weather. Most people wouldn't drive late at night during a storm like this. But Maria wasn't most people. She often showed up even when she was tired, cold, or worn down. Ethan understood she needed the job, and he admired her determination. He kept the porch light on just in case she came. The wind pushed against the windows, and distant thunder rolled across the sky. Ethan stepped outside for a moment, using his hat to shield his face from the rain. The air was cold and sharp. He looked toward the dirt road, barely able to see anything beyond a few feet. Then he saw headlights. Faint, unsteady, but there. For a moment, Ethan felt relief, followed by worry. Driving in that storm was risky. When the old car reached the gate, Maria stepped out, clutching her small bag tightly against her chest. Her hair was wet, her clothes were soaked, and she shivered as the cold wind hit her. Even so, she gave Ethan a small nod, as if saying, "I'll be fine. I'm here." Ethan hurried to unlock the gate and help shield her from the rain as they walked toward the barn. "You didn't have to come tonight," he said gently. "The storm is too strong." Maria shook her head. "I need the work," she replied softly. "And I don't like staying at my place when it storms." Her voice trembled not from the cold, but from something unspoken. Ethan understood she didn't want to explain further, and he didn't ask. He sensed that whatever place she was staying in, it didn't make her feel safe or comfortable. That made him uneasy. Inside the barn, Ethan quickly wrapped a clean towel around her shoulders and set a kettle of water on the small stove. The barn felt warm compared to the storm outside, and Maria's stiff shoulders slowly relaxed. When he handed her a mug of hot tea, she held it tightly with both hands, allowing the warmth to soak into her fingers. "You can rest here for a bit," Ethan said. "There's no rush." Maria nodded and sat on a small wooden chair near the horses. She took slow sips, her eyes following the movement of rain outside. For a moment, her face softened, and she looked less guarded. After a short break, she stood up. "I can start the chores," she said. Ethan didn't want her getting sick, but he also knew she wouldn't accept being told to rest. So he decided to help her with every task that night. They worked together, checking the animals, adjusting the feed, and securing the doors so the wind wouldn't push them open. Rain kept hitting the barn roof, but inside, it was calm and steady. The horses made soft sounds, as if they sensed the storm but trusted the two humans handling everything as they worked. Ethan noticed something new. Maria flinched whenever thunder cracked loudly. It wasn't the natural jolt that people felt from sudden noise. It was deeper, sharper, as if her body remembered something painful. Once, when a particularly loud crack split the night sky, she dropped the bucket she was carrying and quickly apologized, lowering her eyes. Ethan gently told her it was all right, but she didn't meet his gaze. He didn't know what she had lived through, but it was clear she had faced storms, far more frightening than the one outside. They finished the chores later than usual. The storm forced them to check everything twice. When they finally closed the barn doors, Maria looked exhausted. Her clothes were still damp, and her eyes looked heavier than usual. "You should rest a little before driving back," Ethan said. "It's dangerous out there." Maria hesitated. She looked toward the road, then back at him. She seemed torn between leaving and staying. "I don't want to trouble you," she whispered. "You're not troubling me," Ethan replied softly. He guided her toward the farmhouse. He didn't want her catching a cold or trying to drive through flooded roads. The house was warm, lit softly by a lamp. Ethan gave her another towel and a dry blanket. Maria sat gently near the fireplace, still unsure whether she should be there. Her hands trembled as she tried to warm them. "You can stay until the storm slows down," Ethan said. "No rush at all." Maria nodded but didn't speak. She looked around the small living room, taking in the simple furniture and quiet atmosphere. After a while, the warmth from the fire made her eyelids heavy. She tried to stay awake, but the exhaustion she had been carrying for days finally caught up. Without meaning to, she fell asleep sitting upright in the chair. Ethan watched her for a moment. She looked peaceful, but also fragile, as if life had pushed her from one difficult moment to another without giving her time to catch her breath. He placed a blanket around her shoulders and made sure the fire stayed warm. He stepped outside to clear his mind. The storm was still strong, but his thoughts were louder. He walked toward the back of the farm, where the small cabin stood. Rain splattered against the windows. The little building looked almost lonely, sitting there unused. Ethan ran his hand against the wooden railing. He remembered building it slowly, plank by plank, thinking it might one day help someone who needed a place. He never imagined that person would arrive so unexpectedly. Thunder echoed again. Ethan looked back toward the house where Maria slept. Something in him felt sure she needed a safe place. That cabin seemed meant for her, even though she didn't know it existed. The next night, Maria returned late again, but this time the storm had grown even worse. She rushed into the barn, out of breath. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I wasn't sure if my car would make it through the water on the road." "You made it." "That's what matters," Ethan said, relieved. Her clothes were wet again. But this time she didn't seem cold. She seemed tense, as if something had happened before she arrived. Ethan noticed it immediately. "Is everything all right at your place?" he asked carefully. Maria lowered her gaze and shook her head slightly. "It's not." "Good," she whispered. "It's noisy, crowded. Sometimes people argue. I don't feel safe there when it rains." She didn't give details, but Ethan understood enough. She wasn't staying with family. She wasn't staying somewhere peaceful. She was staying somewhere that made her anxious, somewhere she didn't want to return to. He wanted to help. He wanted to tell her there was a cabin waiting for her. But he knew if he said it too quickly, she might refuse. She seemed like the kind of person who didn't want to burden others, even when she needed help the most. So he waited. He let her work. He watched her move with determination despite her tiredness. At one point, lightning flashed brightly near the ranch, and she froze for a second before forcing herself to keep working. Ethan wished he could make everything easier for her. But he also knew trust grew slowly. After they finished their tasks, Maria wrapped her arms around herself, looking small and lost in the large barn. The storm wasn't stopping. Ethan knew she couldn't drive home safely. He told her gently, "You can stay at the farmhouse again tonight if you want." Maria hesitated, then nodded faintly. As they walked back, Ethan glanced toward the cabin once more. He felt something shift inside him. He realized the moment to offer it to her was getting closer. He just needed to show her that she was valued, that she had a place not just as a worker, but as someone who deserved safety and peace. Maria didn't know it yet. She only knew she had found a place where someone cared if she arrived safely. She didn't know a cabin stood quietly behind the barn. It's built with hope and kindness, waiting for someone just like her. And Ethan didn't know how deeply her life would soon change because of it. But he felt it like a quiet certainty in the middle of the storm. Over the next few days, Maria continued coming to the ranch for her night shift. Each night she arrived, her movements were careful but confident. She handled the animals with skill and worked quietly, her eyes scanning every corner of the barn and paddocks. Ethan noticed small details about her that made him admire her even more. She wasn't just working. She was learning, adjusting, and taking responsibility. She cared about the animals, about the work, and even about the ranch itself. Yet despite her diligence, there was always a hint of caution in her expression. A shadow of past struggles she didn't want to speak about. Ethan could see it in the way she flinched at sudden sounds, or the way she sometimes paused mid-task, staring into the dark beyond the barn as if expecting something to appear. He didn't ask. He knew that some experiences were too personal to share, and that she would open up only when she was ready. Instead, he tried to make the nights as calm and safe as possible, so that she might begin to trust the ranch hand, perhaps him. One evening, after finishing the chores, Maria stayed by the barn a little longer, waiting for the evening wind to die down. She had grown tired, more than usual, and Ethan noticed the slight slump of her shoulders. He brought her a cup of tea, warm and soothing, and offered a quiet word. "You've been working hard," he said. "It's okay to take a moment." Maria accepted the cup and sat down on a crate, her hands wrapped around it, letting the heat seep in. She sipped slowly, her eyes fixed on the distant hills. "I didn't think I could do this job at first," she admitted softly. "But it's not as bad as I imagined." Ethan smiled gently. "It's not meant to be easy," he said. "But you're doing very well." For a moment, Maria seemed to relax. She leaned back slightly and let out a quiet sigh. Ethan noticed how fragile she looked, but also how strong she was. She'd been carrying a lot in her life, and somehow she had survived it all. That resilience made him respect her more than he could express in words. Over the next few nights, Ethan began noticing subtle changes. Maria laughed softly at small things, like a horse nudging her playfully, or the way a bucket slipped slightly from her hands. Her eyes, which had been cautious and wary, began to show curiosity and warmth. Yet she still didn't talk much about herself. There was a mystery about her that drew Ethan, and a quiet sadness that begged for kindness and understanding. One night, after they finished all the chores, Ethan decided to speak carefully. "Maria," he said gently, I noticed you tense up sometimes. You don't have to explain if you don't want to. I just want you to know. You're safe here." Maria looked at him, her eyes wide for a moment, then she looked down. "I know," she said softly. "Thank you." Her voice was almost a whisper, but Ethan could feel the sincerity behind it. She wasn't used to being told she was safe, and he understood that more than she realized. The stormy nights had passed, leaving cool, clear evenings. Maria seemed more comfortable now, though she still carried a quiet hesitance. Ethan knew she had lived through challenges that left invisible scars. He had his own memories of loneliness and hardship on the ranch, but hers seemed heavier, as if her past followed her like a shadow. He wished he could ease it, but he also knew that trust and healing came slowly, one step at a time. One evening, as they closed the barn doors, Maria stumbled slightly, tired from the long night. Ethan caught her gently by the elbow. "Careful," he said. "You've been working hard. You need to rest too." She smiled faintly, a little embarrassed. "I'm fine," she said, trying to step away, but he held his hand out again, silently asking her to pause. She hesitated, then let him guide her to the farmhouse. The small building felt warm and safe, a stark contrast to the cold and empty space she had left behind. She had been staying somewhere uncomfortable, perhaps even frightening, and now, for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of relief. Ethan noticed her eyes glance past the farmhouse, toward the back of the ranch. The small cabin stood quietly, almost hidden by trees in the slight rise of the land. He had built it months ago, thinking maybe someday it would help someone. He had never told anyone about it. It was meant as a place of rest, a safe retreat for a worker, or perhaps for someone who needed it even more. Until now, no one had lived there. Ethan decided the moment had come. He walked slowly toward her. "Maria," he said gently, "would you like to see something?" She looked at him, curiosity mixed with hesitation in her eyes. "What is it?" she asked softly. He led her through the field toward the cabin. The wooden structure was simple but sturdy, with a small porch, warm lighting from inside, and smoke curling gently from a tiny chimney. The rain had stopped days before, but the cabin looked cozy, almost as if it had been waiting for someone to step inside. Maria stopped a few feet away, her mouth slightly open. "What is this place?" she whispered. Ethan smiled gently. "It's yours, if you want it. I built it months ago, thinking someone might need a safe place. I never expected anyone to use it so soon, or someone as deserving as you." Maria's eyes widened, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Her life had been full of struggle, of trying to survive from one day to the next. And no one had ever done something like this for her. No one had ever thought ahead for her comfort, her safety, her peace. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and disbelief. Ethan opened the cabin door and gestured inside. Maria stepped forward, slowly taking in the space. A small bed was neatly made with fresh blankets. The stove looked warm and ready to use. The walls smelled faintly of wood and polish. The cabin was small, but it was perfect safe, quiet, and private. I don't know what to say," Maria finally whispered. Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the unexpected kindness she had never known. "You don't have to say anything," Ethan replied softly. "I just want you to have a place where you can feel safe, rest, and be yourself. That's all." Maria stood in silence for a moment, taking it all in. Then, slowly, she walked to the bed and ran her hand over the soft blankets. A small tear formed in the corner of her eye, and she quickly brushed it away. She had not cried in a long time, not for herself, not for anyone. But in that cabin, with no one judging her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Ethan stayed at the doorway, giving her space. He wanted her to understand that this gift was not an obligation. She didn't owe him anything. She could accept it or refuse it. He only hoped she would feel the safety and care that he intended. After a long pause, Maria turned to him. I'd like to stay here," she said softly. Her voice was quiet but firm. "If that's all right," Ethan nodded, smiling warmly. "It's more than all right. It's yours. You can stay as long as you need." She stepped fully inside and looked around once more, slowly beginning to unpack the small bag she had brought. The cabin, which had stood empty for months, now felt alive. It wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of a new beginning, a place where she could breathe, think, and heal. That night, Maria settled into the bed, pulling the blankets close. Ethan left the cabin quietly, making sure she had everything she needed. Outside, the ranch was calm, lit softly by the moon. For the first time, both of them felt a shift. The stormy nights had passed, and a new chapter was beginning. Over the next few weeks, Maria adjusted to life on the ranch. She woke refreshed, helped Ethan with morning chores, and worked at night with renewed energy. The cabin became more than a shelter. It became a place she could call her own. She began to smile more freely, laugh softly at small moments, and even tell Ethan stories of her childhood. Not all of them, just enough to let him know she trusted him. Ethan, in turn, watched her growth with quiet pride. He understood the weight she had carried, the obstacles she had faced, and the courage it took to keep moving forward. He never pressured her, never forced her to talk, but his presence, kindness, and the cabin gave her something she hadn't had before: stability. And slowly, without either of them noticing, the bond between them grew. It wasn't rushed or forced. It was gentle, built on trust, respect. In the shared experience of working together through the quiet nights on the ranch, Maria had come for a job, expecting nothing more than a paycheck. She found a safe place to sleep. But what she didn't know, and what Ethan didn't realize at first, was that the cabin and the care behind it was changing both of their lives in ways they could never have predicted. Maria had been living in the cabin for a few weeks now. Each morning she woke up to the soft light filtering through the small windows, the sounds of the animals stirring in the barn, the faint rustle of the wind moving through the trees. For the first time in a long time, she felt calm, almost as if the heavy weight she had carried for years was slowly lifting. The cabin had become more than just a place to sleep. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could breathe, think, and begin to heal. Every night she continued her work at the ranch. She fed the animals, checked the fences, and made sure the barn and surrounding areas were secure. The animals had begun to trust her as well. Horses nickered softly when she approached, and the chickens followed her quietly as she scattered feed. The quiet, simple rhythm of ranch life was starting to soothe her mind. It reminded her that life could be steady, predictable, and safe. Even after so much chaos in her past, Ethan watched her closely, but without intruding. He noticed the small changes in her manner, the way she held herself with a bit more confidence, the way her eyes lit up at the sound of the animals, and the small smiles that appeared now and then. It made him happy to see her thriving. He had built the cabin without knowing who it would be for, but now he understood. She was the person it had been waiting for all along. One evening, after finishing their chores, Ethan brought Maria a toolbox he had recently repaired. "I thought you might want to make a few changes or add small things to the cabin," he said gently. "It's yours now, fully. Anything you want, you can do." Maria looked at him, surprised and a little hesitant. "You really mean that?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "Of course. This place is yours. You don't have to ask for permission or explain anything." Maria smiled faintly, touched by his trust. She had never experienced such kindness before, someone offering her not just a place to live, but the freedom to make it her own. Her heart felt full, almost too heavy with gratitude to speak. She simply nodded, understanding without words the depth of what he was offering. Over the next few days, Maria began personalizing the cabin. She brought in a few personal items, a small rug, a few simple decorations, and arranged her belongings carefully. Each item made the cabin feel more like home. Ethan noticed her quiet joy, and it warmed him to see her so at peace. It was as if a part of her soul, long buried under fear and uncertainty, was finally coming to life as she settled into her new routine. Maria also began opening up about her past, little by little. One evening, as they sat outside the barn after finishing chores, she told Ethan about some of the struggles she had faced working multiple jobs just to survive, living in temporary, unsafe places, and the constant uncertainty that had shadowed her for years. She didn't tell him everything, but enough to show him the strength it had taken to survive. Ethan listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. He offered only his attention, his presence, and occasionally a comforting word. Ethan, in turn, shared small stories from his own life. He spoke about growing up on the ranch, about his father and the lessons he had learned from him, about the challenges of maintaining the ranch alone after his father's passing. He didn't speak to impress or to teach, but simply to connect. Slowly, a bond formed between them, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. One night, as Maria stood on the porch of her cabin watching the sunset, Ethan approached her with a quiet smile. "The cabin looks beautiful," he said gently. "You've made it your own." Maria turned to him, her eyes reflecting the warm glow of the fading sun. "It does," she said softly. "It feels safe." "For the first time in a long time, I feel safe," Ethan nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. He didn't say anything more, letting the moment linger. Words were unnecessary. The cabin, the ranch, the quiet nights, they all spoke for themselves. As weeks passed, their connection deepened. They worked together during the day, tended to the animals, repaired fences, and shared quiet moments in the evenings. Maria's laughter became more frequent, her smiles more genuine, and her presence on the ranch more comforting to Ethan than he could ever have imagined. She had brought life back to the ranch, just as the ranch had brought life back to her. One evening, after a long day of work, Maria invited Ethan to sit on the porch of the cabin with her. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the air was cool and fresh. She had prepared a small meal for them both. Using ingredients she had gathered from town and some vegetables from a small garden, she had started outside the cabin. Ethan sat down, impressed by the effort she had made. "This looks wonderful," he said sincerely. "You've really made this place feel like home," Maria smiled a little shyly. "I've never had a place I could truly call my own," she admitted. "I've never had anyone care enough to build a place like this for me." Ethan's heart ached at her words. He had built the cabin hoping it would help someone, but he hadn't realized how deeply it would affect her. "I just wanted you to have a safe place," he said softly. "That's all. You deserve it." Maria looked at him, eyes glistening. "You've given me so much more than safety," she whispered. "You've given me hope." For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The ranch was quiet, except for the distant sounds of animals settling for the night. The cabin behind them seemed to glow softly in the fading light, a symbol of new beginnings and second chances. As the days turned into weeks, Maria's life transformed in ways she had never imagined. She had steady work, a warm and secure place to sleep, and someone who cared about her well-being. She began to sleep soundly for the first time in years, waking refreshed and ready to face the day. Her confidence grew, and she started to smile openly, laugh freely, and even share small stories from her past with Ethan. Ethan, too, changed. He had been alone on the ranch for so long that he had grown used to silence and solitude. But now, with Maria around, the nights felt less lonely, the work more enjoyable, and the ranch more alive. He realized that building the cabin had not only helped her, had also brought him companionship and a sense of fulfillment. Unexpected. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars appear, Maria turned to Ethan and said softly, "I don't know how to thank you for all of this." Ethan shook his head gently. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You've earned everything here by being yourself. That's all I ever hoped for." Maria smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. She realized that the cabin was more than a shelter. It was a place of trust, respect, and care. It was a symbol of a new life, one she could build at her own pace, with someone who valued her for who she was. Over time, the bond between them became unspoken but undeniable. They shared laughter, quiet conversations, and small acts of kindness. Ethan would bring her fresh coffee in the morning, and she would make small improvements to the cabin, adding personal touches that made it feel even more like home. They worked together seamlessly, understanding each other in ways that words could not always capture. Maria began to see the ranch as more than a workplace. It became a place of healing, a place where she could rebuild her life. She found joy in the simple routines, feeding the animals, repairing fences, tending to the garden, and spending quiet moments in the cabin she now called home. Every night, as she settled into her bed, she felt a sense of peace and gratitude that had been missing from her life for so long. Ethan, watching her growth and happiness, felt a quiet satisfaction. The cabin he had built, the ranch he had tended alone for so long, and the nights spent in quiet companionship had all led to this. He realized that the simple act of offering her a safe place had changed both their lives forever. And so, life on the ranch continued. Maria worked with dedication, laughed with ease, and slept with peace. Ethan shared his days, his knowledge, and his trust. The cabin, once empty and waiting, had become a home filled with warmth, care, and the beginnings of a deep, lasting bond. Maria had accepted a midnight job she thought would be simple. She had found a safe cabin she didn't expect, and in the quiet nights on the ranch, she had discovered something even greater: hope, friendship, and a new beginning she never thought possible. The cabin behind the barn was no longer just a building. It was a symbol of their journey together, of trust and care, and of a life rebuilt on kindness and understanding. Their story, which began with a simple midnight job, had turned into something far more meaningful. Maria had found safety, warmth, and a place to call home. Ethan had found companionship, trust, and the joy of seeing someone flourish because of his care. And together, they had created a life filled with quiet happiness, mutual respect, and the promise of new beginnings that stretched far beyond the ranch, the cabin, and the nights that had brought them together.